A good performance for the NSE this session. A good performance for the NSE today, at least much more positive than we saw yesterday. What's driving the markets today?
Well, I only have one word. These are foreign investors, who have also created huge demand in the market for certain counters, especially those that are in the financial industry.
Okay.
Financial services as well as the service industry. There's been a huge demand for those type of investments.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about which have been the biggest gainers in the financials and what variables are at play. The foreigners are in the market, but we've also seen, for instance, companies like Kenya Re and Equity that saw pullbacks in yesterday's session. What was the performance like today? Just give us a general sense of which financials are the ones to look out for.
Well, you notice the likes of Diamond Trust Bank, you notice Standard Chartered Bank, as much as the rights issue will start off in October 29th, that's when the shares will be listed. But if you look at from the point of view of its subscription, they were actually looking at 15 million shares, but they got value for almost 24 million shares. That's almost 1.4 billion over above the 2.5 that they were targeting. Then also, if you look at the likes of Cooperative Bank, it's been strong over the last couple of months from a low of maybe about 12 shillings. You're noticing it's almost now hovering at 18 shillings, between 17 and 18 shillings. And this goes to show you that there's been a lot of keen interest in those kind of counters because of their perceived performance and management systems.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about Standard Chartered. Their intent on buying the custody businesses of Barclays. How is this a strategic move for Standard Chartered, and how will it boost the profile of the bank?
Well, if you look at what the whole custodial business comes with a lot of funds, especially held on behalf of pension funds and what they call investment. These are called investment groups, investment banks, or what they call mutual funds, who use custodial services for the banks in terms of investing. The funds that are invested through them are held by the bank's custodial services. All this will simply mean is that it will deepen in terms of the bank's capacity to lend out, owing to the amount of funds that will be available for lending purposes. This will help actually the bank's bottom line. So as far as it is, it seems like Barclays' strategy was to exit, because if you look at it, they're actually selling off their custodial businesses within Africa. It's not just in Kenya. So it's a strategy for them to move out of that kind of business, and Standard Chartered has been the most opportune person to buy off the business.
All right, let's move into the tourism sector, and we've seen the Minister of Tourism releasing results and saying basically that there are higher volumes expected, 1.2 million people to pass through airports in Kenya. The visitor numbers surpassing figures we saw in 2008. How is all of this expected to boost the sector?
Well, if in terms of inflows, foreign exchange inflows, that's a very positive thing. In terms of also, when you look at it from the financials, you notice that also this week, TPS Arena has been one of the counters that has actually been actively traded. It's been one of the gainers this week. I think about 25 or so million shares traded. Then you also look at, in terms of its subscription, its rights issue, oversubscribed with almost 400 million. So going by that, there's also positive sentiments. There's been very much aggressive marketing by the Kenya Tourist Board, looking at newer markets that are moving away from the traditional markets. This was Britain and the US, focusing a lot on Eastern Europe. The new tourists coming in from Russia was a marked increase that was not there before. Countries such as Greece. So when we look at it in terms of that, there's also the value-added service, because the tourism industry is linked. You notice there's an agricultural sector in terms of fresh produce and supplies to these hotels. There's in terms of labor. So feel-good effect will also be there in terms of economic stimulus and generating business and incomes for everyone.
All right. Also, the minister expects earnings to, he projects earnings to come in at about 100 billion shillings. Now, obviously, let's talk about the currency, because what we have seen, obviously, is a slight strengthening of the shilling, but that's largely a function of dollar weakness. Throughout the last quarter, the shilling was quite volatile, susceptible to events in Europe. A lot of tourists come in from the European or the developed economies, bringing with them the dollars and the euros, and there is a sense that with a slowdown, they'd be reticent to spend.
Yes, there is that. There's actually that has been happening. You've noticed that actually the shilling has gone to its traditional almost 79. It's been hovering between 79 and 80, 15, 80, 25. But also the central bank has been playing a role by mopping up some of the dollars in the market. What is happening is that in terms of spending, the spending habits will have more or less been encouraged. That's why we notice that there have been more and more high-end tourists who've come on board, and this has actually helped the tourist circuit. This has helped in terms of moving away from the traditional Kenyan coastal frontage, that's where the tourists are heading, to much more frontiers like the western part of the country. There are much more parks that are being advertised towards central Kenya. You notice that Kenya Wildlife Service has been very prominent in actually marketing other destinations away from the coast. So all in all, we're looking at positive sentiments, and the minister's intended target of 100 billion just may be so, because as you notice, we're heading towards again the high season as we approach November and December.
Okay, and finally, just your views, Waiyaki. There is some news that there are proposed amendments to the CMA Act, and effectively it's going to influence the commissions and the earnings of stockbrokers. It's going to set up a separate exchange or alternative markets for the secondary bonds markets, for instance. Your views on some of these proposed changes and whether or not it will stimulate a new kind of dynamism in the Kenyan capital markets?
Well, it will stimulate dynamism because it will remove the whole issue of trading of bonds just specifically with stockbrokers. We will also involve now commercial banks. But also another thing is that commercial banks will have an added stream of revenue stream and reduce their costs, because beforehand they used to trade through the brokers because brokers were the sole agents authorized to deal with bonds. And all this simply meant was that banks used to pay a lot in terms of commissions. So all that will happen is that it will create much more competition, but more or less it will stimulate the whole trading of bonds, because there'll be other organizations, especially like I mentioned before, these are the commercial banks that will play an active role in terms of trading of bonds, and we might just see much more trading in bonds. As much as we notice this year, the bonds have actually been the most active, but this might be just one more thing to spur the trade, and hence at the end of the day, competition is always healthy because the consumers or investors tend to benefit the most.